Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today.
You know, we have two really important topics. Not that all of our topics aren't important.
Exactly.
This one can really affect you in one way or the other.
No doubt. And hopefully both in a positive way, and
Exactly.
help you avoid some of the negatives on the other one. Yeah, so really excited to have everybody with us today. Thank you all so much for taking some time out of your schedule to be with us. We have two guests that have been here before, but we love having them back. We have Mr. Jason Hunt. Jason is the chief forester out of the Hazard branch of the Kentucky Division of Forestry. And he's going to be talking about timber theft and trespass and how landowners can kind of navigate those issues. So it's something he has to deal with a bit, and he's going to kind of share some of his expertise with this. And, you know, Renee, this continues our series of kind of checking in with each of the KDF branch offices and trying to, you know, kind of get a sense of what's going on in their area. So we really appreciate Jason and the Kentucky Division of Forestry for all the work they do, but also for being part of this show in this series on kind of touching base on what's going on in their area. And we also have Mr. Lee Moser. We always have love having Lee on here. Lee is so talented in so many ways, but he is also a water guru. So he's going to be talking on Water 101. So all things water, all the stuff that we need to know about water and its importance here in Kentucky. And, you know, we kind of coincided these with some special events that are happening. We have World Wood Day on March 21st. That also happens to be the International Day of the Forest. And we have World...
What stuff we talk about, right, folks, occasionally?
And then we got World Water Days, March 22nd. So, you know, we wanted to kind of coincide with those, but we're really excited to have both our presenters. If you have questions for our presenters today and you're on Zoom, please use the chat function. And if you're a YouTuber or a podcast listener, hit us up via email at forestry.extension@uky.edu, and we can respond to you that way. But Renee, glad to be with you on this warm day before it turns snowy tomorrow here in
I heard that. No, shh. You know, snow is a 4-letter word, right?
Hey, you know, we are in Kentucky, so if you don't like the weather, just wait a few minutes. It'll change.
You can't say that on the show. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So, Jason, if you want to turn on your camera.
Greetings, Jason. Glad to have you, buddy.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
And I know I had talked to you several times about some topics that you deal with a lot, and you were like, oh, you know, I talk about, you know, timber trespass is one, and I was like, oh, our woodland owners need to know about that. So we got you on, and we really appreciate you doing a presentation about that.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Jason.
If you want to go ahead and get started.
Okay, I'll share my screen. Well, of course, timber trespass, it can affect a lot of people here in Kentucky. And what I'm going to be talking about today is just some steps landowners can take to help prevent this or ease the burden of possible timber trespass on their property, or if they're performing a harvest for their property, not to get onto their neighbor's property. So, of course, the overview is, you know, timber theft can occur in Kentucky, and it happens across the state. A previous study done by UK shows there's a higher occurrence of timber theft in eastern Kentucky. And I do get several calls throughout the month for timber trespass and what do they need to do to start the process of dealing with their timber trespass. So, of course, trespass can be intentional, you know, like they purposely come onto the property and steal timber, or it can be unintentional, and usually that's the majority usually falls in unintentional. It could be the main reason for that is a lot of landowners do not know their boundaries, or they've identified the wrong boundaries and the neighbors were not notified or anything like that. So the boundary issue is usually the problem. So it's usually unintentional by not knowing. So I'm going to go over some of the laws here in Kentucky. This is the criminal law here in Kentucky for timber trespass. So it's a crime to trespass and steal timber, and trespassing a wooded area is a Class B misdemeanor. It can be a $250 fine and up to 90 days in jail. That's when a fence is crossed. If no fence is crossed, and someone knowingly crossed the boundary, it's $100 fine. Continuing on that, you could be charged with a Class D felony for theft, and it could be punishable up to 1 to 5 years in prison. And that's if there's proof a fence has been crossed or a marked boundary, or if there was notification to the adjacent landowner was given and over $300 of theft was occurred. There's also a civil law. So the criminal law would be what, like the local sheriff's office, or if a theft occurs on your property and you get the local law enforcement involved. So the criminal law would be what applies there, and for the court cases to be established. And then there's the civil law, which would be, this is what allows a landowner to sue a neighboring landowner or the operator or anything like that comes across the timber trespass. So, and usually this is against the landowner who has the operator on the property. So if you're the landowner doing the harvest, the criminal law or the civil law could be put onto that landowner who had the harvest completed. So, because operators are usually considered a third party, and they do not define the boundaries of the property. So when you hire an operator to come in to do the harvest, the landowner's responsible for identifying the boundaries. So, of course, this law is a KRS law, and it's the liability of the person entering upon and cutting timber grown upon land of another, and the measure of damages that occur from that. So, of course, the civil law, it indicates for lawsuits, it can be used for that. So it indicates that you can sue for up to triple compensation of stumpage value and the damages of that harvest on that property, especially if you were not contacted in writing within 7 days prior to the adjacent harvest starting, or if you were notified and you objected to the harvest and the boundaries that was presented by the adjacent landowner. So if the adjacent landowner notifies you of that they are harvesting, and they inform you of the boundaries, and you object to those boundaries, it needs to be done in writing and sent to that landowner who notified you. So in all cases of timber trespass, the rightful owner is subject, they're the ones that can get 3 times the stumpage value and damages. And there's some ifs here. It has to be, there has to be a certain things that happen to make that 3 times of stumpage value be accessible. So, so the first one, the cut's not associated with the harvest on a neighboring property. So this could be an example of this would be a landowner who does not live on a property, or the property is out of state and they're not on the property, and an operator just comes onto the property and starts a harvest. So they're coming onto the neighboring property and starting their own harvest, and it's not associated with the landowner adjacent. So that's one where you can get 3 times the stumpage value. Or the cut was associated with the harvest, but no written notification was ever received by the adjacent landowner. And then that harvest moves over onto your land. Or notification was provided and the rightful owner objected it in writing. So that's only times, the 3 times the value can be assessed. In other cases, it's typically 1 time the stumpage value or damages on the property. So in examples of this is the cutting was done in conjunction with the adjacent timber harvest. So your associated timber harvest was next door, and notification was made, or boundaries were identified and things like that. And then the operator slides over and removes timber from your property. or written notification, of course, was provided within 7 days of the harvest. And then and no written objection was ever provided to the adjacent landowner of the logging operation that was intended or proposed. So damages for a lawsuit to happen, or for what could be included in a lawsuit. So the damages can include stumpage value. So this is all the timber removed from the property. It would require a consultant forester or someone to be able to go in there and identify what was removed, and an estimated value for that volume of timber that was removed. It also includes damages to property, which is fences, if fence lines were removed or taken down. All the roads constructed onto the property. This includes skids trails. And you can see in the picture, in this case here, there was skid trails constructed for removing the timber, and they clogged up ephemeral channels or intermittent streams, and did road construction damage, and trees were removed and the operator left, and then the landowner now has this to deal with. They have, that's something that they'll have to repair or get repaired. Most landowners don't have their own bulldozers or equipment to repair this stuff, so it has to be repaired in some form or fashion. So, and if the operator that was on the property is not repairing it, they're going to have to hire somebody to do that. Also, fees for foresters or consultant foresters, a survey that may be required, and lawyer fees. And all this can be included in the lawsuit. For the defendant would have to possibly pay for all these fees that the landowner incurs. Okay, we have several risk factors for landowners here in Kentucky, and I've listed some of these here that pertain to a lot of our landowners. For sure, one of the main ones is owners who do not live on the property. That is a large risk factor for timber trespass for any time, because if you only see the property once every 5-10 years, you aren't there to witness what's going on, what the neighbors are doing, or anything like that. So, or just, it may not always be the neighbors typically, but it could just be an operator, a rogue operator, coming onto the property. So if you do not live on the property and you don't visit the property very often, that's a good risk factor. And there's also owners who live on their land, but for health reasons or other reasons, they're not able to visit all their property. So especially here in Eastern Kentucky, you have large mountains, large hills, and there's some large properties, and there's access to properties in several ways. There may be mine access from old strip mines. There may be other accesses that the current landowner may not have the ability to visit that all the time, or witness what's going on. Of course, lands where there's ongoing boundary disputes, that's always an issue, or that's a big risk factor. And woodlands where there's adjacent harvest is underway. So, you have a operation down at the other end of the hollow that's coming your way, and they may buy boundaries along the way of other landowners and get up next to you. That's always a possibility. Woodlands that contain large, high quality timber value for sure is a risk factor for timber theft, especially if there's a ongoing harvest next door, and that timber is there visible. That's a risk factor that, it depends on the operator and their trustworthiness. It doesn't take much to just tram down the ridge line and remove some trees. So how does theft occur? So, there's different ways. So, of course, the operator has sometimes been involved in this. So operators legally harvesting a stand, of course, next door, and goes beyond that known boundary. that's a possibility and can happen. But like I said, the high quality timber being on the property next door, they may want to sneak over and just get a couple of logs. Or, operator can set up a logging operation just to steal timber. And that's on absentee landowners that the landowner may live in Michigan or the Ohio, and again, don't come to the properties very often or several years in between visiting. A lot of times, this is what happens. A lot of times, just stealing one or a few high quality value logs. I've had calls before just on strip mine roads or old access roads to properties. It could be even just a one lane highway road going up in a hollow. An operator can just get by on the side of the road, cut the tree, throw it on a trailer, and go off with it. 2 or 3 trees could just be included in this. And we have calls on this several times throughout the year, typically, that someone's just come 1 or 2 days. It doesn't take very long for them to cut a few trees, throw them on a trailer, and go to the mill, and you'll never see them again. And a lot of times in these cases, you don't even know who came up in there. The truck just hauling a trailer came up in there and took a tree or 2. And of course, adjacent landowners that are unaware of the boundary lines is the largest percentage of what happens. Sometimes, especially in a harvest situation, when the operator approaches the landowner may just give them the PVA map and say, okay, here's my lines. But a lot of times PVA maps don't coincide with what actually the lines are. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And that's up to the landowner to make that decision on where that line actually is and identify those lines. So, this is typically what happens is the unaware of the boundary lines, or the adjacent landowner, the neighboring landowner may think they own more than they do or less than they do. So for a landowner who's not planning a harvest, here's some things that you can do to lower that risk of timber theft. So of course, make sure boundaries are clearly marked and posted. That's a big thing that a lot of people here in Eastern Kentucky, for sure in Eastern Kentucky, I don't see it a lot on these properties. There's a lot of properties that aren't posted in any form or fashion. There's no boundary markers, unless it may be an old fence or something. But properties get split up over the years. Different tracts get split out, and there's no boundaries to even see, unless it's just a physical boundary like a creek or a road. And then, of course, make sure your adjacent landowner, if you aren't planning a harvest and you may not live on the property and you're in good terms with your neighboring landowner, and they live on their property, you may want to talk to them one day and say, hey, I don't plan on harvesting anytime soon. And if you see somebody harvesting my timber, please give me a call. There's a problem, because I'm not the one who's, if I'm not planning on making a harvest in several years, just notify that neighboring landowner, and they can keep an eye on that property for you, or somebody in the area, if your cousin, or a lot of times it's family owned property, and you may have cousins or brothers that still live in the area or the county. They can keep an eye on it for you, and just make sure they know that you aren't planning on any harvest in the future. Or you can always have a forestry professional help with planning. So, there are consultant foresters out there that can help with planning for your property and harvest plans. And then also the Division of Forestry, getting a stewardship plan done on your property, especially if you're out of state. It's the local forester can always go out to the property and do an inspection on the property for a stewardship plan and help you with recommendations for your future property involvement. And they can at least report in the planning report, give you an idea of what's going on your property, or at least when you're talking with that forester, especially if you tell that forester, hey, I haven't had any harvesting done in 20, 30 years. And when they go out there and there's harvesting going on, they can report that back to that landowner. So if you're a landowner and plan on harvesting, there's several steps you need to take. So of course, marking your boundaries or making sure they're clearly marked is very important. And this can be done, in the picture here with flagging. Sometimes you may have to obtain a survey if you're uncertain of those boundaries, but surveys can be expensive. And that's not all the time necessary. A survey isn't always necessary for a boundary to be identified. So just an agreed upon line by the adjacent landowner and you can serve as a boundary. So, especially if there's no fence line there, or if there's just a meandering ephemeral channel that divides the properties, or a ridge line, it may be a meandering ridge line. So in these cases like this, you need to approach your neighboring landowner and have them identify their boundaries. They can mark with flagging what they think their boundary is. And then you can go out behind that or daring it and mark what you think or discuss what you all think your boundaries are. And then come across, especially if a harvest is planned, come to an agreed upon line, even if y'all are for sure not knowing who owns what exactly up to that point. Just come up with an agreed upon line that the harvest can come to this point, and just agree upon that and have it in writing. So that way both landowners know the agreed upon line. Painting those boundaries, here's a picture of paint. Some highly visible paint can be sprayed on trees, and this notifies, of course, the neighboring landowner. And if you have an operator coming onto that property, they need to be notified of these lines too. So the high visibility paint and, of course, the flagging shows all this. Fence lines, for sure, is an easy planned harvest. If you're planning a harvest, old fence lines can be utilized for any boundary, and flagging on these fence lines, and they're easily visible. Sometimes there's a lot of times there's old barbed wire fences or woven wire fences on the properties, so they can be utilized. So also clearly mark and identify timber sale boundaries. The whole property may never need a harvest. There may just be a portion of the property being harvested. So it may not even come near your boundary lines. So, but again, you still want to mark those areas, and providing a map like this one, for that area is a good help for the operator to identify those areas and that timber sale boundary, and keep them within scope of where the harvest should be. All right. In summary, any landowner should, make sure those boundary markings are clearly identified, and for any timber sale, for sure, if it occurs. Always make a timber contract with the operator when you're selling your timber, and within that contract, identify the boundaries. It can be maps, it can be written out how the boundaries are. And everybody within this contract should know, that's involved in this, should know those boundaries. They need to be identified. Take that operator out to where the boundaries are, walk them up to the top of the hill, show them, and make sure those are identified, and everyone involved knows where these boundaries are. Make sure you notify your adjacent landowner. That's always important, well before the harvest, so they can have ample time to agree or disagree on those boundaries, especially if you've marked, what boundaries you've marked. They need to be able to identify that and say, yes, that's acceptable boundary, and we can, you can continue with the harvest there, and we shouldn't have any issues with, anybody coming across that boundary to get other timber. So, if timber starts disappearing off their property, the first person they're going to come to is you, and asking why this operator you've hired is coming onto their property. So again, like I said, you're the the landowner identifies those boundaries, and usually a third party does not, unless that boundary's been surveyed by a surveyor, and those boundaries would be a third party identifier. But typically, an operator or the logger is not identifying those boundaries. You're hiring them as a third party to come in and do that timber harvest. So they're not liable for identifying those boundaries. If you are able to, perform several of these steps, if you can't identify those boundaries or can't come up with a timber sale, for sure hire a consultant forester or somebody that can perform the sale for you or assist you along the way. Especially, if you're not able to perform any of these steps, and a lot of times out-of-state landowners may have this issue. If they're not there to identify the sale, identify anything going on with the sale, you probably need to get some outside help to deal with the timber sale. A lot of times these operators they find, especially if they're harvesting on a neighboring property, they may want to move over and see timber on the next property that's next door to that property. So they start contacting landowners. And of course, they may be out-of-state landowners or just live out of the area. And, they'll just say, hey, can I go ahead and harvest on your property? Well, they may be looking at PVA maps or anything else. They don't know those boundaries. If you agree to that and just let it turn them loose on that property without identifying anything, that's really on the landowner. It really comes back and falls on that landowner if they're letting somebody loose on that property without proper identification of those boundaries. So here in Eastern Kentucky, I get several calls, typically a couple a month on timber theft. The Division of Forestry as a whole, we do not deal with any timber theft issues. We are not allowed to, we don't get involved in civil cases, and we don't get involved in criminal cases. As far as the Division of Forestry goes, I can help a landowner, give them information on steps to take or what they need to do. But typically, when a timber trespass occurs, first thing to do is get local law enforcement involved for the criminal case. So that'd be your local sheriff's office, and a criminal case would have to be issued or prepared and all the people involved have to be included in that. That could be the operator, the adjacent landowner, and anybody involved in that case needs to be included in the criminal case. And then, of course, the civil case will come later, after everything has been dealt with and boundaries are identified, what's been removed has been identified, damages have been identified, and then that's when a civil case comes down, and it's a long process. Especially if in cases where an operator just comes into the property and nobody sees them there, nobody knows that they're there, and nobody can identify somebody being there. That could always be an issue for that landowner. But one thing the Kentucky Division of Forestry does, we inspect harvest sites for water quality issues. So, of course, if there is a harvest ongoing on your property or your adjacent landowner's property, you can always request the Division of Forestry to come out and inspect that site for water quality issues, especially if you think there's water quality issues going on for road construction and equipment being in streams, or especially if there's movement of soil and debris within the streams, and you visibly can see that there could be an issue on that site that the division needs to be included in. And then from there, the division can get involved with helping with the water quality issues and trying to straighten that up. But I hope this can help landowners get an idea of what they need to do for harvesting going on their property or their adjacent landowner property, or even property near their property. Give them an idea of what steps need to be taken to to reduce the risk of timber theft. And I guess that's the end of my presentation, and I hope that helps landowners here in Kentucky.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. We greatly appreciate it. We do have a couple of comments, so I just wanted to go ahead and do those. So they said
Okay.
their Forestry uses X Hunt phone app for making TSI crop release areas. It uses PVA land tracks. Several people evidently use that.
Yeah, so Onyx Hunt, yeah, they basically purchased the
Onyx, I'm sorry.
PVA. They purchased the PVA basically files,
Mhm.
and then to get access to them, and then they upload it in their app so people can access them. Jason, so I don't know if all the PVA files are exactly right or not, but what's your experience with that?
Sometimes every county is different. I have experienced a lot of differences in different counties. Some are up to date. Some use ArcGIS and really have pushed forward and gotten up to date with boundaries. And then there are some counties that still use old archaic systems that were in place in the 1980s.
Yeah.
It just depends. It's county by county, pretty much, I think, sometimes. But
So,
like
go ahead.
like on X Hunt, it's a very useful tool. I recommend to any landowner for sure the PVA and the Onyx Hunt, and then just on the ground looking at what they have, comparing those two is always good. And you just have to take it for what it's worth on both sides, and try to figure out which one works the best or what's actually true and what's not true on the property.
Yeah, well, it's certainly verifying, and I think you gave us some really
Mhm.
practical tips as far as like communicating with your neighbors and others, and reaching those mutually agreed upon boundaries and all of those. I mean,
Mhm.
those are some really handy tips, and it always helps knowing your neighbors, right? Good
It
neighbors
does.
is a really valuable thing. So having good neighbor relations is also a really important thing as well. Yeah, no, it's a good presentation, Jason.
Can you repeat the KY statute law number?
Let's see. Let me
Or
go.
maybe pull that slide back up, Jason. If you can just go to that slide and just share that one slide and kind of details the KRS.
Here real quick. So it's for the civil law, it's the KRS 364.1.130. That's the civil law. And I don't have the KRS up in front of me for the criminal law, but that can be easily looked up for the criminal law.
Well, Jason, thank you again. We really appreciate, the work that you do on a daily basis, you and your foresters and the rangers out there. You all do so much important work for Kentucky and our landowners. So on behalf of all of us, thank you, thank you, thank you. Really, we do appreciate it.
And I just hope landowners, they always should make a call to the local forestry office for information to help them along their way, especially if they
Mhm.
got a path they're wanting to go with for harvesting or anything like that.
Mhm.
Every forester in every branch has a different knowledge
Right.
on things, so it really
Okay.
helps.
It does. Hey, we did get one sneak in. Somebody was saying that they've heard of some satellite surveys. Have you heard anything about that? Surveys being conducted via satellite.
Uh, as as far as surveys, not that I know of. I mean, by the Division of Forestry, we will look at satellite information
Mhm.
for harvest sites and things like that. It's always updated. Google Earth is always being updated, and aerial photos are always being updated. So that is that is a tool we use here in our office to look for harvest sites, especially if they're non-accessible. Um, you know,
Yeah.
if we're looking for a harvest site to inspect or trying to find some harvest sites in an area, we always go to Google Earth and use that to identify areas that we want to target or
Right.
anything like that. So
Yeah.
because they're updated usually once a year or every couple of years.
Yeah.
So
I would say, Paul, find out some more about that. See what they're getting. Let us know. Yeah, maybe we can talk about it. All right, Jason. As always, man, appreciate you, buddy.
thank you.
All right, you take care.
So moving on to water, we
Wait,
have
wait, wait, wait.
what? Lee, you can turn your camera back.
Sorry, Lee. I was trying to be funny there. I had to get some.
I wasn't sure if it was
water.
me coming on camera
No,
too soon
no.
or if you just really wanted the dramatic sip, but there you
He
go.
wanted
I was trying to
dramatic.
set you up, so
Well,
no,
Jason did a pretty good job of setting me up too, closing
no
out
doubt.
talking about water quality issues on timber trespass sites. So I thought that was a great setup.
Very
So
good.
we
Lee.
have some water week events coming up, and I had asked you if you could give us some water lessons. So Lee Moser is on to talk all things water. So we greatly appreciate that. So if you want to go ahead and start your presentation.
Yeah, so I think y'all are probably seeing my screen over there.
We are.
An
We got
image
you,
of me out at one of our bio blitzes last year at one of our stream restoration sites with one of our participants. That's here on our campus here in Lexington, where we actually, as a project for stormwater quality improvement, partnered with the city to restore an old stream that was basically really degraded from stormwater flow over time and reestablish riparian habitat. So we're looking at all the little critters, the macroinvertebrates in the stream, and trying to catalog what's out there. So just a little aside to kind of lead into the talk. But yeah, today I'm talking about water in general, so Water 101, but also tying in water quality and letting you all know about some of the things that are going on here in Lexington specifically for Water Week 2025, which starts this Saturday, March 22nd, and runs through the 30th. So for those of you that don't know me, by the way, I should probably introduce myself. Lee Moser, Agricultural Extension Associate, also in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources like Renee Billy. So let me just go ahead and get on into it. So we really can't overstate the importance of water for ourselves, for the environment, really for agriculture in the state, forestry in the state. All of them rely on water, right? And the challenge with water, if you look at the globe, you look and you see so much blue, but only a small portion of that is fresh water that's easily available. Estimates generally fall at or below 1% of water that's actually fresh and easily available from surface and groundwater sources. And then we've got the whole challenge of the quality of the water itself and having to maintain high quality water. Otherwise, somebody's got to clean it so that we can use it for things like agriculture, drinking water, recreation. Otherwise, it's going to potentially cause some issues. And then there's the other kind of issue thinking into the future. We talk about what our population is going to look like in 30 years, 50 years. Well, whatever it's going to be, it's growing and it's going to require more water. And we're having these issues where we're seeing changes in our water cycle, more periodic droughts, more intense rainfall events. So the timing and frequency and intensity of rainfall that we traditionally rely on has become less reliable and problematic in many cases. So when we dial down to what water quality is, probably need to start with a definition. Water quality can be thought of as a measure of the suitability of the water for any particular purpose based on physical, chemical, and biological characteristics. So if you think about physical characteristics, you might think about the amount of light that's actually able to get through the water because there's sediment. Chemical characteristics, are there heavy metals in the water? What's the pH of the water? And what impact does that have downstream? Then biological characteristics, if we think back to that beginning slide where I had a little bug on my hand, what impact does the water have on the organisms that are living in it, whether that's the bugs or the fish or perhaps mammals that are using it for watering sources. So to assess and manage water quality, we have water quality standards that we'll talk about a little bit. Those are set here in Kentucky by the state based off of EPA guidelines. So they kind of have to be in agreement and in accordance with federal laws so that we can protect all those different aspects of water quality that we've mentioned. So protecting water quality is quite a challenge when you think about the landscape scale of the issue. One of the major reasons it's a challenge is because you probably remember hearing this in high school or middle school science class. Water is known as the universal solvent. So it readily dissolves more materials than any other substance that we know of at this point. Not saying that we might not find something in the future, but right now it's the one that can dissolve things like road salts and transport them into our waterways or any other materials that might be on the ground. The other issue is that it has high erosive force and it can suspend and transport contaminants. I'm thinking specifically of things like sediment. It's one of our #1 pollutants here in Kentucky. So certainly managing land use change in a way that prevents erosion and suspension of sediment is important. And then what we do on the land has a great potential to impact water quality, either positively or negatively. And we'll look at kind of a really interesting example here in Lexington that I like to share. And I don't think I've ever shared it on this program. So um, let me see if I can get this to advance. Everything's misbehaving this morning. I hate it. So I got to back out and just kind of start where it all begins with the water cycle. We've got evaporation from various sources of water, gets up into the atmosphere, condenses, then we have precipitation, and that's where all the fun stuff really starts happening when the water comes back to Earth. And you look at this image that USGS put out, looks really nice, really natural. What we don't really see is human impact. So if we zoom in, this is really the kind of the story of land use change and how it impacts water quality and that interaction with the water cycle. So being in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources, I always like to highlight the value that forest land provides in protecting water quality. So something like natural ground cover, say this forest, really does a good job of reducing runoff, promoting evapotranspiration and infiltration, both shallow and deep. One of the challenges that we run into as we develop land, we begin to see more runoff from impervious surfaces, things like buildings, roads, sidewalks. We also have issues with things like compaction. So infiltration can be reduced, and then less evapotranspiration. So the issue with that is we end up having waterways that receive higher volumes of water at quicker rates, and it can really lead to degraded water quality. So this is the example I like to really use to highlight what land use change and urbanization looks like. This is a historic aerial photo of UK's campus from around 1945. So many of you all may not be too familiar with campus, but I put some landmarks in that should help kind of guide you. So the road that's running from bottom right to top left, that's Nicholasville Road. So here's the main body of campus, Memorial Hall, if you're familiar with it. Rose Street, Forestry buildings probably somewhere right around in here. Our Good Barns down here. And then there's this curious pond. So we fast forward about 80, 90 years, and this is what it looks like. This is a great example of land use change over time. So where's Clifton Pond? Well, that's the bowl outside our library now. Memorial Hall is still there, Rose Street marker where Forestry building is, and our Good Barn. But other things that you notice are a lot more homes, less green space, and we've got big parking lots, stadium out here. So we've had to, over time, go in and retrofit some of these areas with stormwater management structures to reduce our impact on water quality to local waterways. And then moving forward, we incorporate best management practices for stormwater into the design of basically every structure going forward, because it not only impacts water quality, but also water quantity, the volume and the timing of runoff that gets to our local waterways. Really tragic story down at this little stretch of stream, another one that got restored on campus. We actually had a loss of life here on campus back in the mid 2000s, and it was a flooding event. So we've really taken a redoubled focus on incorporating things like detention chambers under parking lots to slowly meter water out. If you go along Alumni Drive by the stadium, you'll see a series of 3 really large detention basins that help to slowly meter water out as well. and various other projects around campus that are really working in this urban setting to improve water quality, but also address that volume issue that's quite a challenge when we're thinking about things like urbanization and its impact on water quality. So here's the other kicker. Here in central Kentucky and other parts of the state that you'll see here shortly on a map, we've got this kind of challenging issue with water called karst. Karst can be really beneficial if you have a spring on your property and you want to use that water for either a municipal drinking water source or for watering livestock or something of that nature, assuming the water quality is good. You should always consider testing it and ensuring that that's the case. But the challenge that we've got is that underneath places like Lexington, we've got these karst conduits where we can have things like sinkholes or swallets in our streams taking water down into our groundwater systems and then potentially reemerging and discharging into other areas around our watersheds. So there's this intricate connection, especially in our state, but also in other regions, between our surface and groundwater systems. So what we do on the land impacts what happens to our groundwater, and then it emerges somewhere downstream. Just kind of one of those challenges that we have to deal with here in Kentucky. And this is kind of the extent of areas that have karst potential, those areas that have lots of sinkholes and swallets and gaining and losing streams and springs. And it's really a large portion of the state. You know, here in the central bluegrass, we have a really high potential for karst, but also, you know, in this band, you know, wrapping around from Fort Knox, E-Town to Bowling Green, and all the way out to, you know, our farm out in Princeton, our research station. So it's this kind of layer under a layer of a challenge. So one of the issues with water quality is a lot of people feel vilified sometimes when we talk about water quality, you know, feel like people are pointing the finger at them, but really it's all the different things that we're doing on the ground. One of my favorite sayings related to water is if it's on the ground, it's in the water. It's really a sum of all the different things that we're doing on the land. So there's best management practices that we can implement, whether it's for stormwater, on farm, on your own property, for residential stormwater management. So if it's on the ground, it's in the water. And then, you know, as I was mentioning with karst, it might be in the groundwater too. And there's a good chance if it's in our streams here in Lexington, it's going to find its way to a local sinkhole or swallet and then emerge somewhere else. So very, very important to consider. So what kind of issues are we talking about? I've already mentioned sediment a little bit as one of the #1 pollutants here in the state, but also things like floatable debris and trash. When I showed those two images of UK's campus, you know, I talk to students about that a lot, and I say, well, what do you see in this picture? And they say, well, lots of buildings and fewer trees, but the things that they don't often pick up on is the increased density of, you know, humans in that area and vehicles and the trash and perhaps vehicle fluids that we might be leaking. So things like floatable debris, pathogens from either sanitary sewer overflows, things like E. coli, or perhaps in some parts of our state still having issues with some straight pipes. So there are lots of areas around our state that have issues with pathogens in the water, bacterial issues, perhaps viruses in some situations. Nutrient runoff can be a big one. We advocate for nutrient management planning both in urban and rural settings. So it's really important to know what the nutrient content of your soil is prior to applying things. So that's a good thing to consider as a best management practice. Just general chemicals in the landscape can find their way into waterways, things like herbicides and pesticides. Atmospheric depositions and another water quality issue, another source of contaminants that can find their way. Heavy metals, things like brake dust actually have lots of heavy metals that can find their way into waterways. And then just emerging contaminants. You all have probably heard of things like PFAS. That's one of the biggest new ones, but there's always something new coming out that we may not even know is causing issues to us. And it's likely carried by water in many cases. So who deals with water quality in Kentucky? Well, I like to say we all deal with water quality in Kentucky, but who's responsible for the management? Primarily the Kentucky Division of Water, but also other agencies. You know, Jason, the folks at the Division of Forestry, talk to people about water quality plans and things like that with their harvest. So I think everybody has a role to play, but primarily if you're looking for information related to water quality, I highly recommend checking out the Kentucky Water Maps portal. There's both a link and a QR code on here that will direct you to that. So if you're interested in what the water quality is, where you're at or where you're going to be, maybe where you want to go fishing, maybe where you want to go swimming, all those different things are available. Groundwater quality samples through this watermaps.ky.gov. And when when Division of Water is thinking about water quality, they're assessing water to see if it's meeting its designated uses. That's often a term that's used and maybe not necessarily highlighted often for general audiences. So designated uses in Kentucky are habitat, both warm water and cold water aquatic habitat. The majority of our state's warm water aquatic habitat. If you're thinking about cold water aquatic habitat, you're thinking about very few areas that might support trout or cold loving fish. The ones that I'm really fond of: primary contact recreation, secondary contact recreation, things like swimming and fishing and wading, respectively. And domestic water supply, that's a really important one. So anything that we put in the water, if we're going to be using that water for a water source, we'll have to treat it. And treatment costs go up as we have more contaminants in our water. And then one of the probably least understood designated uses is an outstanding state resource water. So those are those areas that are least impacted in the state and really signify what, just maybe not natural's a hard word to use, but just an excellent quality water system looks like out in the state. So this is one of the areas where I do a lot of my work is around the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Plan and the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Act. So when I give talks about water quality, I like to include it. So I can encourage folks to check out the tools that are available and the best management practices that can be available. And some of them are available through cost share if you participate in those sorts of programs. So basically, the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Act requires anyone with 10 or more contiguous acres of land engaged in active agriculture or silviculture to have an ag water quality plan developed. And basically, the different sections of that include silviculture, pesticides and fertilizer, the farmstead itself, crops, livestock, and then the one that's probably most near and dear to my heart are streams and other water bodies. So if you are a property owner or an operator that leases land, consider checking out this Ag Water Quality Plan website and seeing what resources and opportunities might be available to you through that. So there's lots of other ways to protect water quality besides implementing an ag water quality plan or putting BMPs on the ground. Big one, and you're doing this today, is getting informed. There's lots of resources, as I mentioned, through the Kentucky Division of Water's website. So another set of links that will take you to things like permitting guidance. Any water quality information that is relevant to the state is going to be at their clearinghouse here on this side. And then the other one that I like to encourage, many of you may have already done this for water issues over the years, is reach out to Extension. Our agents are folks that are knowledgeable about water quality plans. And if they need to, they can refer y'all to some of us here in Lexington that work on water quality issues regularly. So this is one of the reasons I wanted to be here today, was to kind of plug some of our work with Water Week. We've got 4 events coming up next week here in Lexington. Good opportunity to engage and see some of the sites here on campus that I've talked about with stream restoration sites. We'll be doing some service learning events throughout the city as well. some litter cleanups. But the take home is another great way to protect water quality is participate in public events. So get out, meet like-minded people. You hear amazing stories from around the state of people getting out and basically finding community around water quality issues. Another opportunity that's out there from time to time is to provide feedback. Recently, I was at a public meeting for a local watershed group, and they wanted feedback on the monitoring results that they've compiled from 10 years of progress. Sometimes there are opportunities for things like focus groups and surveys, and I know we all probably get a lot of those requests, and it can be fatiguing. But that's really one of the key ways that folks like myself and other water quality professionals guide our projects is through community input and interest. And then if you're interested in citizen science, I would encourage you to check out Kentucky Watershed Watch. They've recently revamped a lot of their training and sampling programs. So this is another great way to connect with other like-minded individuals that are interested in water and get out and collect some water quality data that can be used for decision-making purposes. And then if you're engaged in ag, I want to encourage you to think about joining one of the Good Idea shop talks that are coming up. This is a program designed through several extension groups across a couple different universities to basically provide an opportunity for farmers to talk about conservation, what's working for them, what's not, and then that has the implication of having benefits for water quality if we're out putting conservation practices on the ground in whatever setting we're in, whether that's an urban setting, an agricultural setting, and a forestry setting. We know that best management practices, when implemented properly and maintained, do a great job of protecting our water quality. So with that, I have sped through my presentation. Hopefully that was helpful for everyone. If you have questions, feel free to throw them in chat or speak out in just a moment. But you're also welcome to shoot me an email, and I would be remiss if I didn't encourage you to check out the amazing website that my colleague Catherine Bullock designed at soilandwater.ca.uky.edu that hosts many of our resources and links out to partners' resources related to water quality for the state. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and exit full screen and throw it back to Billy and Renee.
Awesome. Thank you so
There
much.
you go. Oh,
Good job.
it makes me thirsty.
Yeah, me too. Talked a
No,
lot.
great job. Really, seriously, Lee. It's so thoughtful, and you gave us so much to think about. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And really ways to kind of get engaged and learn more. So
I even wore my canoe and kayak shirt
I
today
love it.
because
You're
it's going to
very
be
themed.
75 today, and I might try to find a way to get on the water this
There you
afternoon.
go. Yeah.
Well,
Folks, go ahead and, sign up for some of these Water Week activities. That would definitely, help them out and teach you a little bit about water in the process.
yeah, we had one of our viewers was saying, "Hey, Watershed Watch needs more volunteers." So if you're looking for a way to give back to the community and to the state, this might be a way.
Yep.
So thanks again, Lee. We appreciate you being on, and I'm sure I'll have you on again.
Yes,
Absolutely. It was good to see everybody, and I hope everybody enjoys the lovely weather out there before
Yeah.
we get that Kentucky swing tomorrow.
yes, sir.
Mhm.
As always, thank you, Lee.
Thanks.
All right, Renee, good
So,
stuff.
yes, learned a lot about, timber trespass and water in different ways and, different things you could do for timber trespass. So, it's an awesome show.
Yeah, really good. Really appreciate Lee and Jason for the presentations, but we really thank you all for being with us, right? Whether you're viewing us live or you're checking us out on a recording or a podcast, thank you, thank you, thank you. If we can do anything to help you all be better stewards of your properties, let us know. We want to cover topics that are important to landowners here in Kentucky. And if you're dealing with something, there's a good chance somebody else is dealing with it too. So let us know what you'd like to see or get us to cover. Renee does a great job of identifying guests out there across the state and bringing in other expertise. But we'd love to help you all be better stewards of your land if we can.
Because if you have questions, about something on your land, someone else probably has the exact same question. So let's go ahead and get those questions answered. So you can go to fromthewoodstoday.com and you can fill out that little survey and give us any show topic ideas. Or if there's a show that you've seen in the past that we've done and you're like, I really need to see what they said about that. All of them are on there except last week. So we haven't done that yet because my students are on spring break, but that's okay. There'll be 2 coming up that you can catch later next week. So we really appreciate you joining us, and we will see you all next week. Take care.
Take care, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
From the woods today. From the woods today.